class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be discussing the game between the Sharks and the Islanders, in which the Sharks managed to win 2-1. And you'll find that this game was very, very familiar to the game just the other night against the Golden Knights, in which the Sharks also won 2-1 in overtime. Not only was the score the same, but the overtime game-winning scorer was also the same, both of them being Logan Couture. And what's actually kind of funny is that the Islanders were coming into this game with 2 straight overtimes, both of their game winners from Brock Nelson. They came in here with a 3rd straight overtime now. It was the Sharks who were coming in with just a single overtime before and now have their own player with 2 straight overtime goals, that being Couture. What this also means is that while the Islanders do continue their point streak, now 17 games, they do add another loss on top of that, so they are 15-0-2, which is still crazy in their last 17 games, but it's nice to see that the Sharks managed to take the extra point from them. And this one started off in the first period. It was tied 0-0 by the end of it, but it would be the second period where we'd get our first goal. Marcus Sorensen would make it 1-0, but it would not be a lead that would last all that long, since the Islanders would manage to tie it up with Cizikas' goal just about 20 or 30 seconds later. This one would actually get challenged for goaltender interference by DeBoer, and he was, I would say, half right in this situation. He of course loses, as that's what the Sharks do, but there was goalie interference on this play. Just unfortunately it was Brent Burns' stick who actually pushed Martin Jones and got him out of position. So if it had been Cizikas' stick doing that, it likely would have come back, or hopefully would have come back, but because it was Brent Burns, the Sharks ended up taking a penalty in that situation. But in the end, that didn't burn them. They went into the overtime, and while it was not as intense and I guess as fun of an overtime as it was against the Golden Knights, it was a lot more secure. The Sharks seemed to play like most of the other teams in the league play in the overtime. A lot of control. They spent like a full shift, a good minute just skating around the neutral zone, but they finally found their break, and it was Logan Couture once again getting the winner and getting the Sharks the extra point to move to the first time this season actually being above the 500 mark. First thing to talk about would be Martin Jones. It was somewhat of a surprise, at least to some people, that he ended up getting the start in this game after Dell put up a very strong performance against the Golden Knights. But Jones says, whatever you can do, I can do as well, as he puts up a very similar strong performance here against the New York Islanders. So seemed to be a decent choice, at least for DeBoer to actually go back to his starter. He definitely helps win this game, considering that the Sharks offense has been mostly not great here in these past couple of games, only getting a single goal in regulation in both of them. They really needed their goaltenders to step up, and both Dell and Jones managed to get the extra points in both of those games for the Sharks, and even get them the single point, considering that they needed to bring this team into the overtime. And so I suspect Jones should get the next game as well. Next thing to talk about would be the special teams for the Sharks, as the power plays ended up being 6 for the Islanders tonight, as well as 1 for the Sharks, and normally such a massive imbalance would likely point to the refs not being that great, but honestly, I wouldn't say that much. I don't think the Sharks deserved much more than 1 power play, maybe a couple. There was too many men that the refs did definitely miss, but for the Islanders, they likely deserved all 6 of them. The Sharks were taking some really sloppy penalties, as well as that goalie interference call, and so they gave the Islanders the full 12 minutes of power play time. 1/5 of the game, or if you don't count the overtime, was spent on the power play for the Islanders, and the Sharks penalty kill came up huge. Players like Sorensen, Kane, Carlson, Vlasic, Couture, Meyer, all doing their parts, and especially Martin Jones as well. And the Sharks kept the Islanders off the board in a situation where you definitely know in the post-game interviews the Islanders will be talking about missed opportunities there. The Sharks themselves on their 1 power play was quite powerless, and I'd like to see the Sharks power play actually get some difference going on in here. It seems like most of their power plays, at least on the first unit, boil down to passes between either Carlson or Burns, whoever gets the time on that unit, as well as LeBanc and Couture up high, and they basically just pass it between each other until they think a lane opens up towards the net. They'll take the shot and hope for a tip from Kane, Meyer, or Hurdle, or whoever. But I'd like to see, a bit more creativity in this situation, because it has become very, very readable, and it's one of the reasons why the Sharks power play hasn't been all that great in these past few games. It is now about middle of the pack in the NHL, or at least it came into this game middle of the pack. So I'd like to see some adaptations here. I know a lot of people don't like Steve Spott, who I believe is the power play coach, but we'll see what he can do here, as clearly something isn't working all that well at the moment. Next, I will talk about Marcus Sorensen, who had himself a very strong game here tonight. He had the only regulation goal for the San Jose Sharks, and he's actually been quite good for them in these past few games. I haven't talked about it. Well, I did actually mention him once a few games back, but I'll mention him here again. He's been very, very good for the Sharks. He actually ended up with close to 20 minutes here tonight. Second most for forwards for the San Jose Sharks, just a few minutes behind Evander Kane, who was up at 23. Considering the Sharks played 7 defensemen once again here with Tim Heed, it wasn't too much of a surprise that the forward ice time again rose. Evander Kane got a lot of those double shifts with Suomela and Radil, but Sorensen, very, very good player. He's been so good on the third line. Him and Thornton were also quite strong here tonight. I should mention Thornton as well, but Sorensen in particular I thought looked very, very good, and he's a budget player. He's definitely sort of the pinnacle of third line players. This is exactly what you would want out of a third liner. He can play the penalty kill as well, and so he's just been a player who, most people have been talking about Evander Kane, Tomas Hertl, at least when he wasn't injured, Logan Couture having been so good for the Sharks in these past, 8 or so games, but Sorensen has definitely been, under there and somewhat as a dark horse as one of the Sharks' better forwards during this stretch. Finally, I will mention Karlsson, Erik Karlsson. In a strange twist of fate, he has become one of the best Sharks defenders here in these past few games. Him and Vlasic in particular have been such a steady pairing for the San Jose Sharks. Dillon has been pretty good, pretty consistent. Ferraro has been somewhat up and down. Shemek and Burns have both been extremely inconsistent, but Vlasic and Karlsson have been such a mainstay, playing such solid defense here in these past few games. They've been getting a lot of the matchups against the other team's top players, especially Karlsson and Vlasic on the penalty kill tonight came up huge, and it's just, there are moments that you see Karlsson making such safer plays than he was making earlier, and even such smarter plays than he was making earlier. We saw him defend Barzal very, very well in the overtime. We saw a play the other night against the Golden Knights. It was on a pass, I believe it was to Riley Smith. I'm not 100% sure about that, but Karlsson plays the stick of Smith and prevents him from taking the shot that would have been an easy tap in behind Arundel that night. And it's something that maybe 10 games ago we would have seen Erik Karlsson sort of just watch the puck go by, and it would have ended up in the back of the net. So Karlsson has just improved substantially. His offensive game has maybe taken a slight hit because of this, but as I've said multiple times when Karlsson was struggling, I'd rather see him build a strong base defensively and get all of that under control, because he's so skilled that the offensive game should follow as long as he plays a strong defensive game, and he's been doing that in these past few games, which has been both surprising and very, very exciting. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Monday as they'll face off against the Los Angeles Kings, one of the worst teams, if not the worst team in the Pacific Division. I do believe they are still last place, but they have been somewhat better as of late, so it will not be an easy game. Of course, the Sharks and the Kings do have a pretty long history of rivalry in this decade, I guess you could say, although it has fallen off a bit in these past couple of years because the Kings haven't been that good, but I suspect it should still be a fun game to watch. Class dismissed.